Here's Brody Brazil.
Well, let's dive into the controversy. Nike, Major League Baseball, Fanatics, and what's happened in the last several months. I mean, it's almost hard to believe that giants in the industry, like Nike, I mean, they've been making products for decades now. Major League Baseball should know its own people by now. And I know Fanatics is new to this, and maybe they're the least responsible, but you've got three huge entities, and somehow, some way, they got this so wrong that not just one or two people or fans or players were complaining about it. It's on a mass scale. How in reverse did they get this so wrong?
I should say Fanatics isn't really new to this. They have been producing at that same factory in Pennsylvania, which they now own. But that used to be the Majestic factory,
right?
And Fanatics bought Majestic in 2017. Though that same facility with that same equipment and that same staff with those same people have been producing Major League Baseball's on-field uniforms, including the ones with the Nike, the Nike emblem. The last 4 years, they've been producing all baseball uniforms for about 20 years. And so they're not really new to this, but they were given a set of design specs from Nike saying, start using this fabric instead of the old fabric, start cutting it to these specs, not the old specs, change the lettering size, all of that. And I think we see in a lot of Nike's designs, their individual team designs, a lot of times it feels like change for the sake of change, or trying to be different for the sake of being different. And I think in this case, instead of doing that on a team level, they did it for all of Major League Baseball. It's not so unusual for a league to come out with a new tailoring template or new fabric. We see it in the NFL all the time. Nike has produced the NFL uniform since 2012. At that time, in 2012, they introduced new fabric, new tailoring, different seam placement and all that. And they've done that 2 more times since then. And those have gone relatively simply. But the baseball one has been more problematic. I think one reason is baseball always, you have the gray on gray uniforms. And one of the problems, and really to me, the most inexcusable one, is come on, man, can't you get the gray jersey to match the gray pants? That should not be that hard. But I think really a big part of the problem is Nike is always so obsessed with performance. They'll tell you that their belt buckle is now engineered from aviation grade aluminum that's half an ounce lighter than the old belt buckle. And okay, it's great that you sweat those details,
right?
But there are other details that if a baseball if the name on the back of his jersey is made from smaller letters, which is lighter and uses less fabric, and if it's half an ounce lighter, is that really going to change his performance? And you have to remember, and I think Nike didn't really think this part through, baseball is not like basketball. It's not like football.
Correct.
It's not like hockey. It's not like soccer. Mostly, you just stand there. Baseball, if you're a left fielder, you mostly just stand there for most of the game. Yeah. And in between innings, you just sit there.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter. Do I think performance is improved with today's lightweight, moisture wicking fabrics as opposed to the heavy wool flannels of 50 years ago? Yes, I do. But do I think saving half an ounce in weight from making the lettering of the player's name smaller on the back of the jersey makes a difference? No, I don't. And I think that's really something that they didn't think through properly. And in fact, think about it logically. The Yankees have never had player names on the back of their jerseys. Has that given them a performance advantage over every other team for generations? Is that what we attribute the Yankees' success to over the years?
Right.
Because they don't have it's just absurd on its face.
That's such a great point.
I think Nike's obsession with, we do player mapping, we do body scans, digital body scans, and all this stuff. And but at the end, except for pitchers, most baseball players just stand there.
Yeah.
And so they just want something that fits, that isn't too heavy, it's fine. But and shaving an ounce here or an ounce there at the expense of legibility, at the expense of what fans have come to expect in terms of a quality feeling and looking garment, I think was really, really misguided.
The only pushback I'll say is I've never wanted to be a catcher in the summer sun and heat, but that is the only exception to your point. I don't know that baseball has been clamoring for performance wear. So as we digest all the different things and all the different complaints, the small letters on the back, the transparent pants, the fact that Riley Green's pants keep ripping, not just once, but 2 or 3 times now, the fact that there's no more embroidery on the patches anymore, For you, of all the little small details, what's the most offending part? Like, what's the one thing of these new jerseys? And I know they're getting fixed, and I do want to talk about the remedies in a second, but what was the one thing that stood out to you and said, no, this ain't it?
It was a few things. I mean, I know you wanted me to choose one, but honestly, it's hard. There were so many things that all looked like a cheap stadium giveaway jersey.
Yeah.
One was the smaller lettering on the back. Another, I mean, you talk about the embroidered patches. The truth is, unless you're up close looking at it, you can't tell the difference. On TV, if you're watching a game, you cannot tell the difference.
But if you buy one, like you want to know, feel
honestly,
it.
I don't care so much about that aspect
Yeah.
of it. I care how it looks when I'm watching a game. But one aspect that hasn't been talked about as much, but to me, again, looks sort of rinky-dink, is what we at UniWatch call the head spoon, which is the piping that comes up the center of the jersey and goes around the collar. Not
Head
for every
spoon.
team, but for teams that have that. We call it the head spoon.
I get it.
Sort of the handle and then the spoon that goes around the collar. Those lines of piping are closer together this year, and it just looks looks rinky-dink. It looks like a knockoff. It doesn't look as legit. Meanwhile, players are actually getting, and this goes with the smaller lettering too, players are getting bigger. Most of them are wearing their jerseys baggier, right? Like more loose fitting. That is like a trend we see, not just this year, but over time. And so you've got this broader canvas, and you're making things smaller and narrower, and it just accentuates how rinky-dink it looks. So I think that those were both really bad. Moving the MLB logo on the back of the rear collar, moving it down, it just doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't look rinky-dink necessarily, but it just looks off. Like there's too much space above it, and it just doesn't look properly positioned.
I always say it's like television production, which I'm very familiar with. Sometimes if the camera settings aren't right and the color's off or the audio doesn't sound right, the viewer at home doesn't specifically know what's wrong, but they look at it and say, something's not right here. And I think that's the same with all of us watching baseball. And we're not tailors. I'm not. I don't know if you are. You have a lot more background in this. But I look at it and say, even when I was at spring training and felt these, I can't really put into words about the stitching or the fabrication or construction, but something just feels off. And so we'll turn it forward here and say that Nike has come out. Actually, the Players Association has come out to say, hey, guys, we fixed this for you. We're going to change all of this. It may not happen until the beginning of next season at the latest. Do you think that this all actually just gets resolved and they revert back to the ways? And it's amazing because, as you mentioned, Nike and Fanatics were making the old Majestic jerseys for 4 years and nobody said a peep. They thought they were great. Do they just revert back to what they were doing and the problem's fixed and it's like it never happened?
There are so many unanswered questions about this situation, and that is the biggest one. There were already unanswered questions about why did they do some of these changes?
Yeah.
Why did they move the MLB logo down? Why did they make the head spoon piping closer together? Those questions have not really been addressed. But the biggest question now is, we've been told they're going to address certain things, but does that mean they're just going to put the larger lettering on the existing new fabric? Or are they going back to the old fabric, the old tailoring? They haven't really said that or even acknowledged that those questions exist. And honestly, I'm not sure they know the answer to those questions yet, because it seems pretty clear from a follow-up statement. You mentioned the union put out a memo, but then Major League Baseball put out a statement last Friday and saying they stopped saying that these changes will be made by 2025 at the latest. They just said in 2025. So it seems that most of the changes will happen for the start of next season, except they did say the mismatched grays. And it was funny the language they used. They said slight variations in color that a few teams have experienced. They really tried to minimize it and kind of make it sound like anybody who noticed this was just nitpicking. And, meanwhile, while I'm sitting here talking to you, there are fans like emailing me and tweeting things at me like all day long about this kind of stuff. But they did say that the mismatched shades of gray on the road gray uniforms could be addressed as soon as the second part of this season. So hopefully after the All-Star break, that issue will be resolved. We'll see. They didn't say, does that mean they're going back to the old gray fabric?
Right.
Or they're making a change to the existing new gray? It's we're still going to find out how that plays out.
Well, the pipeline is difficult. I've talked to, people who work in this industry of equipment managing for Major League Baseball teams, and, they make their orders for spring training in the fall of the year before. So there is a delay to this process. And if they're going to stop the presses, so to speak, I mean, it is going to take months and months for teams to ultimately get these new jerseys. So I'm not surprised. Go ahead.
It does take a while. I mean, you're talking about just getting it done for the players.
Right.
But the real problem is that they've painted themselves into a corner because of all the retail activity.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense that they're not going to change the size of the lettering on the back of the jersey until next season. Because if they did do it this season, then what about all their retail partners who are stuck with tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of jerseys that A, no longer match what the players will be wearing on the field, and B, the reason they don't match what the players are wearing on the field is that everybody said, oh, the smaller lettering stinks.
Right.
So as a retailer, you're there with this inauthentic and disliked and basically yanked from on field inventory. And what do you do with all that inventory? And so, I mean, that's a real problem with jersey retailing, is that it drives and sort of determines the schedule of what we see on the field.
I know who I'm talking to here, so I know why you're, knee deep into all this stuff. But, I've also seen quite a bit of response from fans who are upset by this story. Certainly the players wouldn't speak out unless it really was a problem. I know there are some out there who say, guys, we're just talking about sports uniforms. It's not that big a deal. I can't really tell as I watch on TV. I think in this case, and this is kind of my final thought on it, there is a reason for people to notice this and maybe not be thrilled with it and say some things about this. And there should be a little bit of course reversal and maybe even an apology eventually for getting this wrong. I mean, it's not life and death, but it's also noticeable.
Mm-hmm. I think the union memo really put it perfectly. They said Nike was re-innovating something that didn't need to be innovated, or as I like to say, it wasn't broke, but they fixed it anyway. and that's, I think a lot of times with uniforms, I don't mean to put uniforms on the same level as medicine or being a doctor, but that phrase, first, do no harm,
right.
They should think about that whenever you're redesigning a uniform. And when people say, it's not that important, it's just a uniform. Of course, it's not life and death. It's not world peace. It's not, famine or hunger or anything like that. But the reason I've been able to write about this stuff for so long, and the reason people care about it so much, is that rooting for a team is this completely irrational form of devotion. Jerry Seinfeld calls it rooting for laundry, right? That's like the famous phrase. But if you think of it, you mentioned branding earlier. If you think in terms of brand loyalty, usually if you're loyal to a brand, that means you're loyal to the product. Like I like Cheerios. I have Cheerios for breakfast every morning. I do like the yellow box and the logo and all of that. It's familiar to me. But what I really like is the way that Cheerios taste. Mm-hmm. And if they changed the taste, or the if it got soggier in milk or something, my loyalty to the yellow box would only go so far. But with sports, the quality of the product and the content of the product, which is the players, is changing all the time, because the players get traded, they get injured, they retire, free agency, all this. So your team can be really good one year and really bad the next year. But we remain loyal to that logo, to those team colors, and to the uniform, no matter who's wearing it. And that is a really intense and, frankly, completely irrational form of brand loyalty. And that is the power of a uniform. And that's why people care about this stuff.